Hello, everyone. Yes, I've been at this a long time. I have a cane to prove it and two bad knees. But I am absolutely thrilled to be here. Just a little while ago, I didn't think I was going to be. And I usually come in time to check out the room that I'm going to speak in, just to find out what the background is. And I was relieved that I guessed that it might be beige, and I changed my very fancy beige plenary speaker outfit just at the last minute, thinking maybe I need something a little darker, because there are often beige curtains behind me, and you'd be seeing a face and hands, and that's the only thing you'd be seeing if I stuck with my original wardrobe choice. So anyway, so nice to have you. Look at this room, you're full. Sitting in front here, I couldn't see how many people are here. How wonderful. Happy anniversary. Happy anniversary. Happy anniversary. Thanks for the history. For me, it was a walk down memory lane in some ways, starting with the John Trim era. But anyway, thank you for that. And such engaging welcomes, too. I mean, I feel very warm and welcome, don't you? Maybe not after my talk, because mine's very pedantic. It's very academic, because that's what I thought I was supposed to be doing. So there you go. But anyway, as I said in my abstract, the language assessment field has taken many steps in recent years to become more learner-centered in adaptive testing, I would say, accommodating neurodivergent learners, providing more customized feedback, and all of that is good. But more pertinent to my theme, there have also been efforts to promote learner agency. I'm thinking about OECD's Learning Compass, the English Learning-Oriented Approach, and CEFR's. I always say CEFR's, so now I'm going to try to do CEFR's, European Language Portfolio. However, despite these initiatives, and they're important, and I recognize them, but despite them, we still have, in a recent call for papers for an applied linguistics conference, they were looking for papers that would discuss learner agency. There were a lot of subtopics that were recommended. None of them were about language assessment. And so I wondered, that's really interesting. Why is this? After all, few of us really can deny, I think, that we live in tumultuous times, not only where I come from, but the world. And many feel disempowered by policies, actions, and forces over which they have little or no say, and certainly no control. Do you feel that? I certainly do. So why is this? Why is this? It seems to me that we all, I accept these invitations because I think might have something to contribute, but also because I learned. I've already learned this morning, this afternoon. It's the afternoon, isn't it? I already learned this afternoon some things, and so you've been invited to learn, and I'll second that. So let me move on and just tell you what I have in mind for my time with you today, and just a brief, well, not so brief, but an outline. This is my introduction. I'll say a little more something about what I'm going to say. I have the enabling conditions. I'll define learner agency, talk about characteristics of agency, and what agentive learners believe and can do. And there are 5, and then I'll take those 5 and talk about the implications of learner agency for language assessment. I'll discuss very briefly the principle of equifinality, and finally, in concluding, talking about neoliberalism, transformative agency, and collective agency. Did you see why I said mine was rather academic, rather pedantic, not so much engaging as our previous presenters were? Okay, so that's my outline. So cultivating agency, Evan Thompson called it the capacity to act in the world, to act with intention in the world. And it seems to me it's critically important, as I just said. Learners need to be prepared not only for current times, but for the times to come. And as Nicholas reminded us, they're changing all the time. And yes, Johannes said that as well. So even on a modest level, learners have to be helped maybe to take advantage of the many opportunities for learning that the technology affords these days. And that takes some agency as well, even though it's a much more modest goal. So it seems to me, that agency is important. However, I'm going to argue a little bit about the theme of not the theme of the conference, but what maybe a little bit about how I would redefine it. Because promoting agency does not take place in the way of empowerment. What I mean by that is agency can't be conferred. It's not that I can't say to you, be agentive, or I empower you, right? That's not agency, is it? What I can do, what I should do, I think, is to establish enabling conditions. It's not about empowering test takers, rather what one can do to establish enabling conditions to encourage the development of agency in whatever form the individual and socio-cultural conditions warrant. You get that? Do you see the difference? I mean, I can't say be powerful, but I can create conditions in which you can find and identify and practice your own power. You get that? I think that's an important point. It seems to me it is anyway. So then we want to talk about what are some enabling conditions. Now, one enabling condition clearly in large-scale exams, language exams, is that successful performance can give test takers options. Giving options is an enabling condition for learner agency. As Sullivan points out, internationalized standardized tests just this year, was published this year, represents far more than just a score. They are stepping stones to personal growth and global participation. However, let's be honest here. Hashimura, McDormand, and Zhang counter this is not true for all test takers. We don't all have the same options. But giving options is one enabling condition for empowerment or agency. So what is learner agency? Learner agency is the feeling of ownership and sense of control that learners have when they believe themselves to be active authors of their experience rather than passive recipients. And you're an active author of your experience rather than a passive recipient of it. I like I had something to do with writing it, but I like the way that that's put. Truthfully, one of the reasons I came here is because I think you, language assessment specialists, have enormous power. I'm not empowering you. You have the power. You have enormous power to make a difference in many test takers' lives with regards to learner agency, among other things, in assessment practices, and the positive washback that they engender more particularly. So characteristics of agency is dynamic, it's not fixed, it can be learned. It's relational. And relational just means both the learning and the enactment of learner agency may be facilitated or constrained depending on the condition of the local ecology, how organisms interact with each other and their surroundings. The critical realist, Jeremy Bouchard, I'm trying to think of, it would be an example of somebody in applied linguistics, critical realists, who talk about use Archer's distinction between the relationships between structure and agency. And maybe some of you are familiar with it. Structure has to do with laws, economic conditions, socio-cultural conditions. And then there's the agency. And how do they interact? As Claire Crumpsch puts it very well, I think, we're free to act, but at the same time, we're not in control of the choices that are given to us, right? So I think that's also a nice way to think about agency. We're free to act, but we're not always in control because there's both agency, but also the structure, the context in which the agency is enacted. It depends on, agency depends on learners' perception of affordances. And affordance for a learning opportunity depends on the actions and perceptions of the learner. That's from Leo van Leer. So it will do no good to have a language-rich, immersive experience if learners don't perceive in that experience the opportunities to learn. So, and that's not automatic, right? We know that. You just can't just put somebody in learning, going abroad, for example, very rich opportunity, but they don't always take advantage of that. They don't perceive the opportunity, or for whatever reason, don't benefit from it. As I've written, agency is always related to the affordances in the context. So how is this definition of agency and these characteristics manifest in agentive learners? And again, I said there were 5, and here they are. Agentive learners believe that they are in control of their learning. They have the ability to learn and to improve. They take initiative, seizing and even creating opportunities to learn. They take risks, confident that they can learn from their mistakes, and they're also resilient. They have the ability to adapt and persevere in order to overcome setbacks. So the 5, it seems like these are worthwhile outcomes. They're outcomes. One might ask, though, to what extent these outcomes transcend cultural differences. For after all, cross-cultural studies have shown that in certain cultures, the preservation of social harmony supersedes the autonomy of the individual. So while cultural differences may be profound, I would argue that the desire to succeed in today's neoliberal world, the power of agency is strong. You see this in the numbers of people who take your tests. The point is, though, that agency cannot be adequately defined as an individual attribute, right? It takes place in a context. The socio-cultural ecology within which it's enacted also needs to be considered. Notice I said socio-cultural. I just mentioned the cultural, but there's a social or socio dimension to it too, because one's upbringing, for example, social upbringing, can affect one's feeling of agency as opposed to powerlessness. I raised my own children in the European American family. What's the first thing that one of them says, starting to feel agentive? Let me, no, maybe it doesn't happen. I was wondering if it was a universal. Let me do it, Mommy. Let me do it. No? Have you not heard that? Some of you have. Well, I don't know, maybe I raised my children differently, but that was, I'm sure I did. But that's what you hear. Let me do it, Mommy. I mean, that's an agentive, right? That's an agentive act. Anyway, as Nick was kind to point out, I'm not a language testing expert. Maybe you saw that already. Although you may be relieved to know that I consulted with 3 of them before this talk. I always try to do my homework to some extent. And then just a brief word about myself that's relevant to the topic of learner agency. When I became the director of the English Language Institute at the University of Michigan, I convened my testing staff, and I asked them, how can we make our tests more learning experiences? How can we give our test takers learning experiences from taking the tests, beyond the feedback, beyond the preparation they would do for the tests? How can we make them learn from taking the tests? Do you see the distinction I'm making? Not before or after, but during. Well, my testing staff said, I think you're confusing or conflating language teaching and learning with testing. I'm sure they said that very politely, but that was the impression they gave me. And I admit that I'm a convergent thinker. Much of my career has been spent trying to reconnect dichotomies that I think are false. They're complementary, but not dichotomous. So I've talked about uniting grammar and communication, and I call it grammaring. My pet theory, complex dynamic systems theory, talks about the lack of ability to separate language learning from language use, puts the two together. I've talked about before, Michael Halliday had the term lexical grammar, lexicon and grammar going together, and anybody who's done corpus work or construction grammar knows the interconnection between lexis and grammar, right? Phrases and grammar. Michael Agar talks about language culture. So I think there's certainly something to be done in challenging assessment and learning in general, and assessment and learner agency in particular. Is there a way that we can see and bring them together? So one of the key takeaways from the LTRC conference this past year, as reported by Becky Knowles, this was a report in June of 2025, is the importance of integrating learning and assessment in the classroom. But I ask, why stop at the classroom? Why not assessment and learning more generally in large-scale exams? So let's go back to the 5 characteristics of agentive learners and see how we might do that. Not me, not we, you are going to do that, is to take these characteristics and work with them in an assessment context. So the first one, if you remember, was that agentive learners believe they are in control of their learning. So why not give test takers, and I have to apologize in the beginning, I'm not a test taker, you might be doing a lot of this already, but here are my thoughts anyway. And you can say, inappropriate or impossible, but you got to listen, I guess, or you can leave. But I mean, I have a few more minutes to talk about this. Agentive learners believe they are in control of their learning. So the first enabling condition is to give them some control. And for instance, there's been a call recently in listening assessment for test takers to have some control in the form of self-paced listening. And then Guggenbüchel and Kreml and Press note that as it is usually implemented, self-paced listening allows test takers to start, pause, and navigate the audio position during a listening test, citing Goodwin 2017. Assessing listening with a degree of test taker control is not only for the purpose of construct validity and authenticity, face validity, and transfer of training for that matter, but it also acknowledges the agency of learners, many of whom are digital natives. In an article published this year, Harding wrote, what students are asked to do, they should find relevant to their lives. Students deepen their learning and enact their agency in relation to something that they recognize has a value for them. The great psychologist William James pointed out years ago a problem which he called the psychologist's fallacy, where we see things from our perspective. It's fallacious, not taking the perspective of someone else as well. So a task is never just a task that the test developer has designed. It's always the task as interpreted by the test taker. When it comes to reading passages or writing a topic, we know lexis really affects outcome, right? There are certain topics I couldn't write about because I don't have command of the lexis. So why not then give test takers a choice? And I think they often do have a choice about what they write about or what they read, what passage they read. And how about extending that choice, not only by the topic, but also by the level of difficulty of the text? Of course, that's what happens with adaptive testing, but why can't we give learners a chance during the test itself, now here you're going to tell me this is impossible, to alter the level of difficulty during the test? Why can't we ask learners to do that? I thought that would be an interesting thing. Is that interesting to you? You're all looking at me. Is that interesting to you? Just to think about it. How can they, in the middle of the test, they say, I'm in trouble. This is really too hard. Is there a way for them to alter it? Of course, the scoring would have to be adjusted as well. And the time frame is a problem, I know, but it seems to me that's something that would support their agency. Of course, self-correction. Am I still? Yeah. Self-correction. How about speaking? So can we give speakers a second chance? Maybe they would, record once, listen to their recording, and then be able to record it a second time, giving them some agency over their product. And we know that self-correction leads to deeper learning in any case, but it also teaches learners how to figure out things for themselves and contributes to the feeling of confidence, which is part of learner agency. The second one was have the ability to learn and to improve, so help them learn and improve. Of course, feedback is one way. There's feed forward as well. As Emma Yoshioda talks about, or says, the present is not only shaped by the past, but it's also shaped by anticipation of a future to come, with varying degrees of agency. In other words, there's a temporal dimension to context, feed forward, as well as feedback. And feed forward focuses on future improvement, offering test takers suggestions for how to do things differently in the future. And my example there is from Maggie Dunlop, where she used cognitive diagnostic tests with learner agency in mind. One of the tools that language assessors can use is CDM, or cognitive diagnostic modeling. So you can go beyond a reading score, for example, and help learners develop, by tagging items, help learners develop profiles in their sub-skills. And Maggie's dissertation in particular, I'm going to cite, where she actually shows with the orange bars what the test shows. That's the top bar in each of these sub-skills. So the first one is using vocabulary. And the first bar shows that they didn't do so well, I guess, on using vocabulary, at least not compared to the bottom line, which is what they thought they did. You see? So they get a report of what the test says and what they themselves evaluated themselves in doing. This is the cognitive development. So they get to compare how well they think they did on a particular skill and how well they did. Okay. Did I take care of business there? Oh, no. So then there's affordances. I talked a little bit about those. Personalized and leveled affordances. Affordance is a learning opportunity, I mentioned that earlier, in the environment as perceived by the learner. So research shows how learning opportunities arise from computer-assisted feedback that's personalized, Maggie Dunlop. If the feedback could be leveled, that would be even better. And by that I mean, we know that lower-level learners need more direct feedback, whereas higher-level learners can be guided by asking them questions about their work. Could that be built in somehow into the tests? Or one way of personalizing them is through CEFR, CEFR. Sorry, we all say CEFR on the other side. Anyway, you're personalizing it by using CEFR. Oh, I learned something. Does that count? Who asked me to learn something? I learned something. There you go. Another language. But through the use of can-do statements. You may know, by the way, that 25 years later, the TOEFL IBT, do you know this? In 2026, TOEFL has just introduced a new scoring scale that purports to be intuitively aligned with CEFR. Did you know that? I just thought that was sort of breaking news, but anyway, interesting. 25 years, but they're doing it. And then, of course, Barry O'Sullivan writes, instead of vague goals such as improve speaking, specific descriptors, for example, CEFRs, I can do it, in B1 can provide feed-forward guidance. So can enter unprepared into conversations on familiar topics and target learning and assessment activities. I shouldn't have looked away from the paper. You probably know this by heart. Do you know these by heart? Assessment activities or talks at these descriptors. Okay, And it seems it's increasingly possible to do this, that is, to help with personalized feedback and feed forward and leveled because of AI. You know, that's I think one of the benefits. There are challenges as well, but in the future, AI is going to personalize a lot more, clearly, in terms of education curriculum toward a specific student, a specific topic that a student needs. And Chen, just this last month at the American Association for Applied Linguistics conference in Chicago, claimed that language assessment is undergoing a significant transformation, moving away from static, high-stakes, standardized tests, these are his words, toward dynamic, personalized, and AI-driven methods. If he's correct, it would portend pretty well for learner agency, it seems to me, as long as the materials, the corpora that these large language models are based on are representative. Otherwise, they get biased, and of course we know that is a problem, right? You know that problem of the skewing of the large language models because of the data that they were trained on, not including minority voices, for example. But anyway, it seems to me that AI can help with leveled and personalized feedback, take initiative, even creating opportunities to learn. How can we help our learners learn from positive washback? And many exams, of course, do test grammar, because I said measure capacity, not only static grammatical competence. Many do measure grammar, but usually not as a separate item or a separate section of the test anymore, as they once did. It's rather evaluated through speaking and writing sections. We're told again, the January 26 TOEFL IBT as an example, when evaluating grammar and speaking and writing, the graders are going to look for issues with verb tenses, subject-verb agreement, noun plurals, articles, and sentence structure. But grammar is much more than using forms accurately. So my 15 minutes of fame, if I have them, came about with this pie chart, which I tried to show that grammar is, yes, about form, and you can see it in one of the wedges. Can you see that? I hope it's clear enough. In the northwest wedge, it is about form, it is about accuracy. Grammar is that. But that's just one dimension, because it's also about meaning, and it's also how we use grammar structures to mean something. We use language to mean, right? And how do the grammar structures support that? And it's about appropriateness, too. And I don't mean necessarily social appropriateness, although sometimes that might be relevant depending on the goal of instruction. But discourse relevance, which is important. Discourse appropriateness, which is important in academic language anyway. So I could say there's a large audience here today. I could also say, at least in North American English, my dialect, I can say there's a large audience here today. I can contract the there with the is and say theirs, right? Can you all do that? Sounded fine to you? Would. But here, now try this. There are language examiners. There is language examiners, probably not accurate, but if I say there's language examiners here today, does that sound better? No? Didn't? Can't say there is language examiners, but if I said there's language examiners? How about if I said there's language examiners, publishers, and who else? Onlookers. Does that sound all right? Sounds okay to me. Sounds okay to me, even though we have plural in the predicate following the verb to be, which suggests that you shouldn't be able to do that, but we do. I do. Meaning, you can say there's a large audience today. It's a large audience. What's the difference? We use there for a particular meaning. And how about use? I can say there's a large audience here today, or I can say a large audience is here today. Whoa. There's a large audience here today. A large audience is here today. And there's a difference in appropriateness. Now, I know you're saying, wow, it's pretty subtle, Diane. I'm not going to do that to our test takers. Well, I had to find an example that challenges you to think a little bit. But my point was that it's not only about form and the accuracy of form. It's also about using these grammar structures to mean and to use them in a discourse way, an appropriate way. Canadians William and Congdon in the TESOL Canada Journal say richer descriptions of grammar are available, and they cite my form, meaning, and use, and Michael Halliday's systemic functional linguistics. Okay. Indeed, if grammar is construed only as forms that have meanings and uses only as forms, testing only grammatical accuracy, as many tests do, it's severely limiting. Positive washback could lead to teaching students much more robust grammar, necessary at least in an academic context. Polytomous scoring, Jim Pura said, use polytomous scoring rather than dichotomous, not just right, wrong, but degrees of rightness or so. I don't know if that's grammatical, degrees of rightness. And this is really pie in the sky. Do you know that expression? This is like really way out. But along these same lines, it would be highly useful, I think, for promoting agency if examinations could allow for the emergence of new, innovative constructions, not simply conformity to attested instances or to norms of standard languages. Of course, norms have their place. But how about innovation? Indeed, the perception of a difference between an era and a linguistic innovation really just depends on who the speaker is, right? I said I can say theirs, and you all nodded, or some of you nodded. It depends on who the speaker is, whether it's an innovation or an era. So in last month, the Wall Street Journal's article, they had a headline in their newspaper, front page, why the global elite gave up on spelling and grammar. They're global elites, they can do that, right? Well, maybe we need to find ways to allow learners to be expressive in innovative ways as well. And then there's the Modern Language Association, which is the premier professional organization in the United States that for English language arts and literature teachers, not second language necessarily. They do have one intersection, but mostly it's general English instruction. But it's the premier organization. They published the Modern Language Association style guide, which is very popular. And they headline March 31st in their newsletter called The Source. Headline was, should have or should of? I should have. Of course, it's isomorphic, isn't it? The labiodental fricative at the end of and have is the same. A lot of people will say of. A lot of people will say of. And they say you shouldn't, but that should have is always the right choice, they say. Oh, and this is the one, and I'm pretty good about tolerating, except in my own children, the way they speak. But the one that's dominant now is I can see your sign, but I can't read it. What does it say? How many? 10? I can't see what the number is. Sorry? I didn't know I was doing Q&A on the keynote address. I got to keep talking. I'm almost, I'll talk faster. How's that? I can really get carried away with this. You know that. Okay. So anyway, the one about my children, you want to hear that one, don't you? Using the object pronoun using the subject pronoun where the object pronoun should be. So between you and I, they'll say, rather than between you and me. Or, and a lot of people do this, it's not just my children. Or just in object form, I can't, I keep going on this one. But the point is, languages change. And would it be possible to measure, wouldn't it be nice to measure not only on accuracy, but degrees of acceptability? Language is not a closed system, it's not static, it's constantly evolving, and not just over centuries. Okay, a few more. Attentive learners take risks, confident they can learn from their mistakes. How about providing learner-driven feedback? This is something from Moss. How about, so where learners drive the feedback dialogue by asking for specific feedback, offering test takers options to receive more practice. For example, they get a score report, and then they could check a box if they want to receive certain, no time for that. Would somebody be kind enough to open one of those bottles? Thank you. So, Graham, you're great, thanks. I have to mention Mariangela too. Is she here? Mariangela took care of needs that I didn't even know I had. It was great. I want to bring her home with me. So, the Alta people have been fabulous, really. Thank you. Thank you. Can I get 15 more seconds? Thanks, Graham. I'll just leave it. Okay. Where was I? Learner-driven feedback. In a hyperbolic moment, I have suggested that we shouldn't be teaching learners we shouldn't only be teaching learners language, we should be teaching them adaptation, to take their current language resources and learn to adapt them to new situations, because that's what we do. We're always adapting. And there's a way to teach adaptation. I've written about that. How can they learn to do that? And that seems to be adapting to changing circumstances is crucial to learning agency. Examiners could have test takers do the same task twice, where the imagined interlocutors are of different backgrounds or proficiencies or social status, and then observe and measure how they construct meaning, how they mediate it. Okay, and then is Nick Glasson here? Okay. Oh, there you are, because I was going to give you a long quote, but forgive me, I'll make it short. He in his award-winning paper, talked about learning a language, interactional skills. When learning a language, interactional skills are fundamental, even though we don't necessarily test those. Okay. Language learners are resilient, ability to adapt. So I can foresee a time when the tests are self-referential, that learners learn or are assessed what they know and can do now that they did not know or could not do before. And I'll have to leave that, I guess. There's self-assessment as well. Winky, Shang, and Pierce also had an award-winning article in the Studies in Second Language Acquisition on self-assessment. More generally, we need to optimize the potential, you need to optimize the potential for all test takers to perform to the best of their abilities. A lot has been written about these. The one I haven't heard too much about is Voices from the Global South. So McConey et al. Talk about how in an academic context in the Global South, there are particular practices like, for example, face-to-face oral discussions or collective conversations, dialogical narratives. And we know that plural linguists take tests. You know about translinguals, Shahani's call for 2 languages to be tested at the same time. We know about plural linguals. They're going to have a different learning experience. They're going to have a different testing experience from monolinguals or even bilinguals. Where's Uli? Even trilinguals, right? Trilinguals are going to have a different experience as well. Okay. But here's an important point. I really do need I think I started late, didn't I? So I have another minute. 2 more minutes. The boss says 2 more minutes. Because I think this is important. These are 2 quotes about categories. Because as Amy Gutman, the president of the University of Pennsylvania, when she said this, when we categorize people, we lose sight of their humanity. humanism. At its core, immigration is about the fate of millions of individual people, refugees, yes, but individuals with lives and families. And then in the language testing area, Taylor and Banerjee, test takers within a given category are not a monolithic constituency. What works for one person with a documented disability may not help another, et cetera, et cetera. So we have these categories, and we do it to be helpful. It's natural to categorize. At least we're recognizing some of these categories. But within the category, there's great diversity as well, which, maybe we can address better with AI. I told you before, or I mentioned before, might be personalized stuff. These dynamic learning maps, you perhaps have seen them. They demonstrate multiple and alternative ways that students can acquire the knowledge and skills necessary to reach a particular goal. These were developed with what they called severely cognitively impaired learners. They had 1,900 descriptors. That'll put CFR. How many does CFR have? Anyway, they had 1,900, and they showed this and how you can, in other words, we don't all learn in the same sequence, right? But there is equifinality. There is a way to get to the goal, whatever that is for you, in a different way. You can map a different path. As we wrote, as Lynn Cameron and I wrote, it may no longer be sufficient to talk about individual differences as a backdrop to a universal learner and learning situation. So forgive my ignorance. You may be doing a lot of this already. I'm not suggesting you're not. But it seems, given the significance of the topic, that the fact that we are all educators bodes well for making language testing experiences agentive learning opportunities. So in conclusion, I think it's only fair at this point to point out that the discourse of student agency can be criticized for taking a neoliberal approach, imagining students as agentive beings and letting them decide about their learning process and assuming responsibility for their results. Zakaria and Argadus last year wrote, concomitantly, it can be argued that language testing is rooted within hegemonic structures. Examinations can be viewed as one means of reproducing power through procedures of classifying and hierarchizing individuals. It seems to me Biesta has it right on this one. He says, really, the question is whether we are indeed measuring what we value or whether we're just measuring what we can easily measure and end up valuing what we can measure, right? Oh, I'd like to say that 5 times, but I can't. Ask me later, I'll recite it for you. So speaking, I was going to talk about tester takers agency. Let me move on. Transformative agency, Sinino, Engenstrom, and Lemos. I love this. Transformative agency is a quality of expansive learning. Learning expansively requires breaking away from a given frame of action and taking the initiative to transform it. The new concepts and practices are generated in an expansive learning process, and they carry future-oriented visions loaded with initiative and commitment by the learners. And if you don't like neoliberalism, or you don't like the status quo, then collective agency. If we do not accept the conjunction between agency and neoliberalism, we can challenge it through collective agency. In the exercise of collective agency, people pool their knowledge, skills, and resources. I think this is what we're doing here, or will, acting together for a shared purpose to shape their joint future, to change social structures, and bring about innovation. So to conclude, the social change or outcome that I can foresee, envision, or at least hope for, is an interconnected and interdependent, integrated language learning, teaching, and assessment ecosystem. I believe that language testers can support teachers. Teachers have agency too, of course, in supporting learner agency. I believe it's in your power to do that. And I think this vision is needed now more than ever. I have faith in your capacity to deliver it. Thank you.